Earlier this week, casting about for a quote to put on the front of the bulletin, I came across the work of Sir Ken Robinson, a British-born author and educator who is also a professor emeritus at the University of Warwick in the UK. Sir Ken is perhaps best known for his TED Talk on creativity and how schools kill it. In his 2009 bestseller, The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. I'm sure that's a great book, and finding your passion is a good thing. But what grabbed me most about Robinson was his notion that our ideas can enslave or liberate us. How appropriate for today's text, which begins fittingly with the Apostle Peter in chains. Peter, who had found a passion which changed everything for him, has been arrested and imprisoned by King Herod, who has just put the disciple James to death. In prison, Peter is being guarded by 4 squads of soldiers. He is bound with 2 chains. He's sleeping between 2 guards, and there are guards in front of the door keeping watch over the prison. Peter is locked down, tight. He is, if not literally enslaved, then certainly not physically free. Herod and the Roman legions are colluding to do everything in their power to keep him that way. Their idea being that if they could just keep him in confinement or do away with Peter altogether, then that would stop this growing movement of Jesus people following the way. Meanwhile, Acts says, the church was praying fervently for Peter in prison. The text doesn't let us know the content of their prayer, but apparently it was effective because in the middle of the night an angel appears to Peter, nudges him in the side, and says, "Get up quickly," and the chains fall off his wrists. The angel tells him to get dressed, and the 2 of them proceed to walk past not just 1, but 2 guards, and through the iron gate out into the city, which opens for them without them even touching it. What an incredible story. And when Peter is outside the gate, the angel, who Peter had thought was just part of a vision, disappears, and he's left alone. That's when he comes to himself and thinks, I'd better get out of here before the people who imprisoned me find me. He knew, Peter did, that he was still in peril. My old professor, Walter Brueggemann, wrote recently, the gospel is a very dangerous idea. We have to see how much of that dangerous idea we can perform in our own lives. There is nothing innocuous or safe about the gospel. Jesus did not get crucified because he was a nice man. No. Jesus was crucified, and Peter was imprisoned and eventually killed because they stood for an idea. They stood for the idea of the gospel. They learned and then stood for the notion that love and justice and the welcome of God called the old exclusionary I'm in and you're out ideas of established religion and the dog-eat-dog survival of the fittest, violent, fear and death-based mentality of the Roman Empire into question. So they lived a different way, a way that was threatening to those in power. Insiders have always had a difficult time being called to welcome and care for outsiders. Empires do not want to be challenged to attend to the needs of the most vulnerable in their midst, even by priests in their prayers, which makes the gospel a dangerous idea. But it's also a liberating one, because it sets us free to acknowledge and embrace our common humanity, to move beyond the confines of tribe, and in the words of our Peace USA brief statement of faith, to listen to the voices of peoples long silenced. Which brings us to Rhoda, the maidservant who enters the story when Peter shows up banging at the gate of John Mark's mother, Mary, in her home. Rhoda hears the knocking, recognizes Peter's voice, and then is so overjoyed that she goes to tell the others that Peter, the very one for whom they've been praying, is at the gate. And here's the remarkable and yet not very surprising thing. They don't believe her. Tell her that she is out of her mind. This, by the way, is not the first time that the testimony of a woman as to what she has experienced has been dismissed by men in Luke and Acts. It happens in Luke when the women return from the tomb on Easter morning to tell the disciples that Jesus has risen. Luke says of the disciples in their reaction to the women that these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. Now, to be fair, both resurrections and dramatic escapes from well-guarded prisons would be and are the sorts of things that are hard to believe. But here's Rhoda telling them that the very thing for which they had been praying has happened, and they dismiss her. I think they do that for two reasons. First, they dismiss Rhoda's testimony about what God can do because it runs counter to their expectations. Did you hear that? They discount Rhoda's testimony about what God can do because it runs counter to their expectations. Even though they've seen God do amazing things in the past, even though they say they believe in a God who raised Jesus from the dead, they don't really expect anything different, or that God can do amazing things through them and their prayers. By the way, I think the church and individual believers over the centuries have always had an uncanny ability to sell themselves and God short, shying away from stepping out in faith and daring new directions, or moving with confidence into change and transition in life, because we don't really trust that God has us no matter what. I heard the other day, and I'll never forget it, that sometimes the only transportation available to us is a leap of faith. When you make that leap, there will always be people around you tell you that you are out of your mind to do that. You're out of your mind to spend time with that person who thinks differently than you do. You're out of your mind to begin that new project in the church. You're out of your mind to forgive the one who hurt you so deeply. You're out of your mind to love your enemy. You're out of your mind to think that you or someone you love will ever get free of the bonds of addiction. You are out of your mind to believe that prayer really works, even if one of the ways it really works is that it changes you. I mean, the very idea of it. Maybe getting out of our minds is not always a bad thing. I have a good friend who is fond of talking about the limits of enlightenment and rationality. The Enlightenment, let's be fair to it too, brought Western culture out of the Dark Ages and into a period of great progress, and it has had many benefits. But my friend says that what lies behind the Enlightenment project is the idea that the more you know, the more you can understand. And the more you can understand, the more you can control. And the more you can control, and here's where it really starts to go off the rails, the more you can manipulate. And the more you can manipulate, the more you ultimately can exploit for your own benefit. And the bitter fruits of that way of thinking, and the way it breaks down, are all too evident in our society and in our world. Let's give the Enlightenment its props, but also recognize that there's a dark side to Enlightenment rationality. Could it be that the gospel is centered in a different and more liberating idea? An idea that Rhoda and people who live towards or on the margins of society, the maids, the underclass, the people who are unjustly treated because of their skin color or their gender or their sexual orientation, know better than we do and share what they know with us, and will share what they know with us if we'll only listen to them and come to believe them. Like the idea that there's room at the table for all, that I am my brothers and sisters and siblings' keeper, that life is not about what I can acquire for myself, but what I can give of myself, that the axis of the world does not, in fact, go through the center of my head as a white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, that we can admit privilege and share power rather than hoarding it. Yesterday, the larger church lost a Rhoda when James Cone, an African-American liberation theologian, died. Here's something James Cone said: "The church is to remain faithful to its Lord, must make a decisive break with the structure of this society by launching a vehement attack on the evils of racism in all forms. It must become prophetic, demanding a radical change in the interlocking structures of this society. James Cone, the man was out of his mind. Our ideas, you see, our ideas can keep us trapped in the way things have always been. They can keep us trapped believing that nothing can or will ever change in our society or in our individual lives. Our ideas can cause us to believe that certain things are too outlandish to hope for or to work for. Our ideas really can enslave us, or they can liberate us. I was on my way to Emmanuel yesterday morning to finish getting ready for Marjorie McGough's memorial service when I heard a little segment on NPR from Scott Simon. Maybe you heard it too. In the segment, he talked about seeing a photograph of 13 semis, tractor-trailer trucks parked side by side, shoulder to shoulder, below an overpass in Michigan at 1 a.m. this past Tuesday morning. Police in the Detroit suburb of Huntington Woods had received a call. There was a man on the Coolidge Highway overpass who said he was going to jump. What happened next was that local authorities and the Michigan State Police immediately closed down all lanes on both sides of the interstate. Interstate I-696, which runs below the Coolidge overpass. According to a state police lieutenant interviewed for the story, that's the first step in a potential jumper situation. Simon said he was driving along I-696 at 1 in the morning. Probably late shift maintenance workers, hospital staff, lots of cross-country truck drivers. State troopers went from truck to truck, backed up and stalled traffic, and told drivers who were probably disconcerted to be delayed that a human life was at stake on that overpass. They asked the drivers to pull out from the long line of vehicles and park their big rigs under the bridge. 13 trucks soon filled the lanes below the overpass, the intention being to provide a safety net for the man in case he happened to lose his grip and fall, or in case he decided to jump. If so, he would have only fallen 5 to 6 feet rather than 15 to 16 feet. The trucks, Simon said, stayed there for about 3 hours until the troubled man came off the overpass, could be taken to a hospital for examination and counseling. One of the truckers said on Facebook that a highway patrol officer walked to the cab of each truck and shook the driver's hand to thank them for answering the call to help a fellow human being. Scott Simon concluded his story by saying, "The man on that overpass has not been identified and may decide to keep his story confidential. But he was able to see in his lowest moments, in the middle of a desolate night, 13 strangers who happened to be truckers were willing to help bring their busy lives in a fast-passing world to a halt for him for a while." The very idea of it. If you would have asked me yesterday morning at 9 a.m. if something like that could happen, that traffic could be shut down for 3 hours for the sake of one person's life, that 13 strangers on a deadline to get somewhere with payloads would stop and help a stranger, that the machinery of our busy world where time is money would stop for one person in need, do you know what I would have told you? You are out of your mind.